Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, where we discuss mysteries, histories, and occasionally conspiracies. I'm your host Ollie.
And I'm your co-host Belle.
Today we are releasing a bonus video discussing the case of Breatharianism, the idea that you can live without any food at all. Or
Food,
water.
Water, you live solely off of air.
I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Today's content warnings are as follows. Okay, Psych. We are actually talking about fairy circles today, and this is actually my episode, not Ollie's. But we do hope you enjoyed our brief little April Fool's prank.
Yeah,
Fools.
I hope you were not fooled by our idea that Breatharianism is a mystery.
Or a topic that we particularly want to talk about.
It is a thing.
It is a thing. Well, okay, but, yeah. It's a thing, but
it is false.
We just really don't want to lend any credence to it, but it was more just like the most outrageous thing that we could think of at the moment. So now I'll go ahead and get into our real topic for today, which is fairy circles, which ironically enough is no less ridiculous, but just as maybe not quite as entertaining as the theology between however the fuck you say
Breatharianism? Question mark? I haven't done that much research into it. I just know that it has killed people. But anyway.
Moving on.
The opinions expressed in this podcast are the sole views and opinions of Belle and Ollie with a Wild Mystery Podcast Appears. These views are not intended to harm, offend, defame, slander, or negatively represent any individuals involved in the case.
Today we are discussing fairy rings, or also more commonly known as fairy circles.
Trigger warnings include fairies, folklore, and fungi.
And horrible mispronunciations. So, kind of this season leaning more into the conspiracy, paranormal, and folklore, just because it's a topic that I find really interesting. So, we're just going to jump right into it. So, fairy rings, also known as fairy circles, elf rings, or circles, or pixie rings. This is a natural occurring phenomenon that has created a lot of perplexing conversations over the centuries. Long held as the entrance to the Fae realm, or as a gateway for fairies, elves, or pixies, in order for them to come into the mortal world. In appearance, a fairy ring is either a seemingly perfect circle or arc of overly healthy grass, dead grass, or mushrooms. Seemingly random, but almost always very consistently shaped, these fairy circles are really perplexing and really something to see. I did not download any pictures, but I'm assuming you know exactly what I'm referring to. Now, from the way I have it formatted, I'm going to do folklore and then the science. So I did it backwards, but it's fine. So we are going to go into the folklore and long-held beliefs, and kind of break it down from there. So, first, linguistically, in Europe, fairy circles, or in European language, fairy circles tend to have more of a supernatural leaning. I apologize in advance for the various mispronunciations that are about to occur. In French, they're called ronds de sorcières, which translates to witches' circles. And French tradition reports that fairy rings were guarded by giant bug-eyed toads that cursed anyone who violated the circles. In German, they're called Hexenringe, also known as witches' rings. You're seeing a theme. In Europe, fairies and witches were tended to be related, since they both were magic and danced in circles. It's pretty much the only thing. And then continuing on in German, the tradition there was that fairy rings were thought to mark the site of witches dancing on Walpurgis nights, which I read what that was and then immediately forgot.
I have definitely heard that word and immediately forgot.
Oh, it goes from the evening of April 30th to the evening of May 1st. In addition, Dutch superstition claimed that the circles show where the devil set his milk churn.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what that means.
Tyrol folklore attributed fairy rings to the fairy tales of flying dragons. Once a dragon had created such a circle, nothing but toadstools could grow there for 7 years. European superstitions routinely warned against entering a fairy ring, and in general, in Europe in general, it was considered that entering a fairy ring would result in the loss of an eye, and even in the Philippines, fairy rings are associated with diminutive spirits. Focusing more on Western European folklore, English, Scandinavian, and Celtic, people claimed that fairy rings were the result of elves or fairies dancing. Such ideas have been dated back to at least the medieval period, and the Middle English term is Elfringwort, meaning elf ring, which loosely is meaning a ring of daisies caused by elves dancing. It actually dates back to the 12th century. In the folklores of Britain and Ireland, they both contain their own wealth of fairy lore, up to and including the idea from which fairy rings take their name. The phenomenon results from fairies dancing. In 19th century Wales, where the rings are known as Clyschtwelteg, I apologize.
I couldn't have done any better.
Sincerely. Fairies were almost invariably described as dancing in a group when they were encountered. In Scotland and Wales in the late 20th century, stories about fairy rings were still common, and some Welshmen even claimed to have joined a fairy dance, which I found really interesting because all the information that I had is like, once you're in a fairy dance, like, you dance till you die kind of a thing, so I don't know how they would have been like, oh, we're gonna escape it. And Victorian folklorists regarded fairies and witches, this is what I was talking about earlier, as being related, based partly because they both were believed to dance in circles, which I think is it's a stretch. It's like, oh, both groups do this one very particular thing. Nah, mate, they're related. And so many folk beliefs generally paint fairy rings as very dangerous places to be. You should avoid them at all costs. Superstition, says that fairy circles are sacred and that you really should not violate them in any way, whether or not you're just a person tropping through or a farmer if they're in the field, lest you anger the fairies and then be cursed.
Yeah.
And there's an Irish legend that tells of a farmer who built his barn on a fairy ring despite the protests of his neighbors. He is then struck senseless one night, and a local fairy doctor breaks the curse. The farmer says that he dreamed that he must destroy the barn. Even collecting dew from the grass of flowers of a fairy ring can bring bad luck. Anything to do with a fairy ring, you just really want to avoid it, is basically the general consensus. And that even if you go so far as to destroy it, it's unlucky and fruitless, as superstition believes that it would simply just grow back. And then I found a Scottish rhyme that sums up the danger of such places. And I don't know if you want to scroll down to where it is, but oh boy, does it look Scottish.
Oh boy.
I don't even know if I should have tried it. He wha tills the fairies green, nigh luck again shall he have. Okay, I'm just gonna say what I'm pretty sure it actually says in like just English. Not that Scottish isn't English, but like I'm gonna say it like how I would interpret it as being read.
For us
yes.
Americans.
He who tills the fairies green, never luck again shall have, and he who spills the fairies ring, betide him once and way, I'm only translating when I can. I apologize. For weirdless days and weary nights are his till his dying day, but he who goes by the fairy ring, nor not duel nor pine shall see, and he who cleans the fairy ring an easy death shall see. That was painful. I will post this rhyme, but that hurt my brain.
I can definitely, like, in my brain hear it in the Scottish accent, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to attempt that.
Look, I can do accents all day, but, like, not on command for some reason. Like, if I don't want to get ripped apart. Basically, if you dare to enter a fairy ring, many myths say that you will die young. Other ones say that you will become invisible to the mortal world and basically live in the parallel of the mortal realm, which is Fey realm, unable to escape the ring, or you are immediately transported to the, like, full fairy realm. You also might lose an eye for your foolishness. At the end of the day, you'll be forced to dance around the ring until you die of exhaustion or madness. So, if you believe the tales of the fairy rings and fairy circles, there is a way that you can avoid your fate. You're going to love these. To avoid this fate, you can run around the ring 9 times. Specifically 9 times. Okay. 10 is 2 more, and it will actually make your luck worse. And if you wish to enter the ring without penalty, you can run around the ring during a full moon, but only in the direction that the sun travels during the day. And if you do this, apparently you can hear the fairies dancing underground, supposedly. You might also wear a hat backwards because this apparently confuses fairies, and they will not do you any harm. And
the sorcery.
Of course, you are never, ever, 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 under any circumstances, supposed to give a fae your name, as that gives them ownership of you. And that is some very base fae
that, like, I know
information.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between fairies with an I and fairies with an E. Fairies with an I, it's like, oh, you know, kind of like those more free-spirited, like, you know, tra-la-laing through life. But fae with an E are supposed to be more conniving, more trickster, more like, those are the ones, like, you aren't supposed to give your name to. But, so, before we go into the science behind it, what do you think of fae rings?
I think they're cool. I like mushrooms, so...
You a fungi person?
Yeah. So they're cool.
Yeah.
But, and I'm not going to pretend like I haven't also listened to another podcast episode that didn't totally talk about the science behind all of
for
this
sure.
stuff.
For sure. And I feel like it's become, like, other than getting into, like, literally all of the lore that exists regarding fairies, because
it's massive.
Yeah, that would, like, I would need, the best place to go for that is, like, if I could afford to go to, like,
just
Ireland and Scotland and be, like,
just tell me.
Go to a library, just, like, go, and also, like, if I could learn Gaelic, that'd be really cool, but also, like, I have realistic expectations for myself.
I think I tried to learn Gaelic once, and I was having a hard time with the pronunciation.
That's like, pardon? Now, mind you, even though we have a logical explanation based on science for what these are, there are actually many people who still believe in the superstitious leanings of fairy circles. And actually, several people still believe and practice, like, fairy warding and, like, all that stuff. And it's like, you know, if you find, like, a gift at your front door, it's like, this is how you protect your home without disrespecting the fairies, because one of the greatest sins that you can do is like insult a fairy, because it's like,
well, if they're like all powerful, like I ain't insulting them.
yeah,
like,
but it's like, you know, you still want to be like, hey, like, well, it's like, thank you for your protection. At this time, we are, you know,
at this time we are not accepting gifts.
yeah, but it's like there's like literally instructions, but you know, there's a whole like group on, there's like literally,
I find all folklore really interesting, especially where there are overlaps. Like there's a boogeyman in like
every culture.
Every culture there's a boogeyman. There's every culture there is somebody who steals kids.
Yep.
Every culture there is somebody who is like, oh, if you're not good, you know, X person isn't going to give you gifts. like,
which I think is just like half of that is just like parents who are exhausted.
Yeah, most of it is, but then there are also.
But like then you go to like like specifically mythological beings and creatures. Yeah. It's like you have like, dragons, drakens, like gnomes, Wendigo, elves.
Those are all
skinwalkers.
So like you have like a Wendigo. They lots of anthropologists, I guess, would be the people studying them that believe, social scientists, whatever, that believe in climates where, in locations where cannibalism would ever be like something that you had to resort to because, you know, there is the possibility of getting snowed in and trapped with however many people, or there is the possibility of going sailing off and, you know,
the Kraken.
Yeah. That there's this idea that like you have to, it is such a horrible thing that you have to like, you have to make sense of it in some sort of folklore way. Like you are possessed by a demon and that's why you've done this thing.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things are just really interesting where the folklore changes based on location, like based on society. And those are, like, folklore is just very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think just as white people, as Americans, we've been exposed to a lot of Scottish and Irish and English folklore.
No, ma'am.
Welsh, you know?
Yeah.
And so we are inherently interested in it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, like, the way that I consider it a lot is, like, and you look at specifically, let's call, like, skinwalkers and wendigos. I believe those are, like, just the two main ones that I'm thinking of that traditionally belong to Native American beliefs. Or, and it's like, we kind of go back to, like, Egypt, I was trying to say Egypt and Egyptians at the same time, but, like, as two separate words. But if you go back to Egypt and you look at, or, like, Greek mythology and Roman mythology and Egyptian mythology, like, they weren't dumb. So what the fuck were they seeing? And granted, you look at that in terms of a science example, and it's like, I saw this one thing, and it was like, I think it's about the Aztecs. And it's like, they're putting that into as, like, what they know. They're interpreting it the best way they can with the information that they have.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't make them dumb. I mean, it's like trying to say, oh, you know, because you don't understand rocket science, you're dumb. Okay, well, that's great, but I know about all of this stuff that you don't, so are you dumb?
Well, there's, like, the one example that I always think of is Apollo rides his chariot from east to west. Is that right?
For Apollo and Helion, I don't believe that there was ever any specific, like, yes, they, you know, from east to west. And maybe I need a refresher on mythology, but I don't recall seeing anything that specifically said that he only took it from, you know, across the sky, east to west. But I think it was more just like he just hauled the sun chariot. But
Yeah,
I
either.
still think you're right
But-
though. But it's like it mimics
But
like the
they
science.
noticed that the sun moved,
Yes.
and it moved like consistently every day.
Yes.
So he rides it across the sky every day.
Yeah, exactly. Or in Egyptian, I think it's dung beetle rolling the sun across the sky.
That's excellent. I love that.
I forget.
They saw, like, you know, a dung beetle, which most Egyptians maybe would have seen. So it is something familiar.
Kepri. And now for a ad break. So moving away from mythological, folklore, all that kind of stuff, there's actually a really simple scientific explanation for fairy circles. Mycelium,
Which is very interesting.
which is still very interesting of itself, is so...
Mushrooms are cool.
Mushrooms are very cool. Hi, Rocket. So mycelium, which is the root-like structure... Sorry. One of the cats just jumped.
The way that Belle just talked spooked the cat that was on the table.
No, Kepler popped up and was sniffing her ass. And it spooked her. She was like, whoa! So mycelium, which is the root-like structure of a fungus, it consists of a mass of branching thread-like hyphae, which grows out from a single point in the ground, typically in a circle, arc, or ring. So while growing, it absorbs the nutrients in the ground by producing and putting out enzymes from the stretching points of the hyphae. Basically, like, if you compare it to either like branches on a tree or like the roots the roots of a tree in the ground, or you consider like your fingertips, are like basically like the hyphae of it, because it's like the thinnest point that's like stretching out as far as possible. And so enzymes are Rocket. Hey.
Do I need to get a spray bottle?
Ma'am. See how she hit that with her
purpose.
tail? On purpose. So basically, if we're considering it like branches of a tree or the roots of a tree, you have, as the farther out it extends from the tree, the thinner the branch or the root gets at the tip. At that tip, that is where the enzymes are put out. See how I'm very carefully not using specific words that I don't like. And so it puts out that enzyme, which then starts breaking down the molecules in the soil, which is then absorbed through the hyphae walls, and then the mycelium uses those nutrients to continue to grow out from the center. When there are no more nutrients, the center dies, which then leaves a living ring for which the mushrooms of the fairy ring then grow up through the ground. Yeah. So, really cool.
Mushrooms grow super fast.
They do, which is why they tend to appear overnight. Which is crazy, but really cool. And then, so the reason for the extra green grass is because there are more nutrients available in the soil, which acts then as a fertilizer, so the grass becomes extra green. Which then subsequently, when the nutrients are all used up, and you get the converse effect, which is a ring of dead grass. Now, there are two theories regarding the process involved in creating fairy rings. One states that the fairy ring is begun by a spore from the sporocarpus, and that's basically just like, I'm not even going to go into it, it's a spore.
Yeah.
Okay. The underground presence of the fungus can also cause withering or varying color of the grass above, which is kind of like what we're talking about, the extra green to like decaying. It just kind of depends. The second theory is that was presented by investigation from scientists in Japan on the Tricholoma matsuke species, shows that fairy rings could be established by connecting neighboring of these mushrooms, and then if they make an arc or a ring, they continuously grow about the center of the object. Now, within fairy rings, there's typically two recognized types of fungi. You have wood fairy rings, and then you have meadow fairy rings. Wood fairy rings are tethered because they are formed by mycorrhizal, which is a symbiotic association between a fungus and a plant. Think Venom and Eddie. And so the fungi is living in symbiosis with the trees.
Okay.
So they are feeding off each other, living together to support the other. And then in meadow fairy rings, they are referred to as free because they're not connected with other organisms. These mushrooms are saprotrophic. They live and feed on dead organic matter. But what's really truly amazing about these is that they can spread either from very, very small, being only a few inches or feet, to 164 feet or more, or if you metric, 50 meters or more. The largest documented one is in Belfort, France, and it's widely regarded as the largest ring ever. It is approximately 2,000 feet in diameter, which is 600 meters, and is 700 years old.
So is it then, are they the same mushrooms, or are they kind of like...
I think it's like the farther out it goes, it like continues to grow mushrooms.
Okay.
But it's like...
So it kind of like continues to grow then.
Yeah, so it's
okay,
like...
Cool.
What's crazy to me is it's still... Because the way that I kind of read it was like, oh, well, when the center dies, then it produces some mushrooms. But if it's still alive, how does it... And the way I kind of see it is like, I'm wondering if the spore from the center like did die off, and then so it's basically like those spores are out transferring out, and so it's just kind of expanding it.
Yeah.
But since the mycelium is still all connected, that it's still technically the same ring. It's almost like a ship of Theseus.
Yeah.
Where it's like, is it still the same ship? But those are the basic components of fairy ring circles, some of the bonus, the scientific explanation, as well as the folklore regarding fairy rings and the common held beliefs with them. If there's anything that you would like to add to fairy rings or anything you think that I missed, please let us know on our social media. We currently are using TikTok, Instagram, and we also do have a YouTube channel. The TikTok is AWMPA_podcast. And then everything else is pretty much either AWMPA or A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears. And for that is going to be all for today. This has been a review of Fairy Circles. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, recorded and produced by Belle and Ollie.
Please check out all of our social media where we have additional information shared. You can find all of those links on our website at awmpa.com.
We'd love to hear your feedback for our podcast, so be sure to rate and review.
Tune in next week for another episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears.